A winter storm snarled across the countryside as Hercule Poirot arrived at Hawthorne Manor, summoned by a telegram marked urgent. Inside, the grand parlour was heavy with the scent of lavender, crackling firewood, and something far more sinister. Upon a velvet chaise lay Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, society's beloved philanthropist, now frighteningly still, her lips tinged a faint unnatural violet. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Someone among them had administered poison during the evening's private gathering. Poirot, adjusting his immaculate moustache, surveyed the trembling faces and murmured Chapter 1. The Gathering at Hawthorne Manor. A biting winter wind swept across the rolling English countryside, bending the bare black branches as though nature itself bowed before Hawthorne Manor. The sprawling estate, an imposing silhouette of stone towers, steep gables, and sweeping terraces, stood like a solitary guardian atop its hill. On this frigid evening, the manor's many windows glowed with a warm, golden light that defied the cold outside, promising comfort, elegance, and the whispers of wealth that had always surrounded the Hawthorne family. Yet to one particular visitor, arriving at the wrought-iron gates, Hercule Poirot, the lights of the manor flickered not with promise but with unease. It was not often, after all, that a man of his reputation received telegrams stamped urgent and life or death. Poirot stepped from the hired motor car and lifted his polished valise. Snow crunched crisply beneath his shoes, the flakes dancing in the air like frantic white moths. His impeccably tailored overcoat, charcoal, double-breasted, was buttoned to his chin, but the cold nipped even through the finest wool. He paused, examining the manor with the narrowed, critical gaze that had unsettled more than one criminal in his illustrious career. A house, he murmured to himself, that does not wish to give up its secrets. His moustache twitched with irritation, or perhaps anticipation. Poirot had learned through long experience that grand estates often hid grander sins. A footman in livery hurried from the entrance to escort him in, bowing slightly, though his hands trembled enough for Poirot to take note. "Monsieur Poirot, sir, we've been expecting you," the young man said, breath clouding the air. "Lady Hawthorne insisted you be brought directly to the parlour as soon as you arrived." But, Poirot observed with a sharp eye, the footman did not mention the telegram. Nor did he disguise the shadow that crossed his face at the mention of the mistress of the manor. There was fear in this house, a coldness deeper than the winter wind. Inside, the entrance hall radiated opulence, marble floors, oil portraits of stern ancestors. An enormous chandelier, whose cut crystals threw patterns of fractured light across the room. Yet the atmosphere was unmistakably heavy, laden with the kind of tension that presses on the chest like a stone. Poirot could almost taste the disquiet. Though faint, it lingered in the air like a bitter perfume. The footman led him down a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, their footsteps echoing. Voices drifted from the distant drawing-room, hushed, agitated. Poirot recognized the unmistakable timbre of wealthy guests attempting to appear composed while rattled by scandal. "Tell me, mon garçon," Poirot said lightly, "what is the nature of this urgency that required my immediate presence?" The footman swallowed, visibly struggling to form an answer. It's Lady Evelyn, sir. She collapsed during the evening gathering." His voice cracked. "The doctor believes it wasn't natural." Poirot halted mid-step. "Not natural." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You mean she was poisoned?" The footman flinched as though struck. I'm not supposed to say, sir, but the guests, they're all frightened, and Lord Hawthorne—" His words faded. "Well, sir, you'll see." "This house," Poirot murmured, "is in a state of delicate balance. One accusation, poof, and it will topple." His footsteps resumed, and they continued toward the parlour. When the double doors opened, Poirot was met with a scene of composed chaos. The grand parlour, with its velvet drapes, rosewood furniture, and crackling fireplace, appeared lush and inviting. But the guests, 6 of them, were gathered in tense clusters, their expressions strained. Poirot scanned the room quickly, taking mental notes with the precision of a jeweller inspecting diamonds. Nearest to the fireplace stood Lord Alistair Hawthorne, tall and rigid, his aristocratic features frozen in a mask of shock. His greying temples and severe jawline gave him a distinguished air, though Poirot noticed his hands clenched behind his back in futile concealment of their shaking. Beside a chaise lounge, where a body lay draped beneath a blanket, hovered Dr. Malcolm Reed, the local physician, wiping his spectacles repeatedly, a nervous gesture. His brow glistened with perspiration despite the room's chill. Across the room, seated on a settee in a deep emerald dress, was Claudia Mayfield, a striking woman of about 30, with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. Her dark curls were pinned elegantly, though one hairpin had come loose. Poirot noticed such details. Her gaze flicked repeatedly to the covered body. On the opposite side sat Mr. Edwin Stone, the family solicitor, a thin, colourless man who looked as though anxiety had hollowed him long before tonight. His round spectacles magnified eyes that darted around the room like trapped birds. Leaning by the window was Beatrice Hawthorne, the victim's niece, clutching a lace handkerchief. She was young, no more than 22, with soft features that were now contorted with grief. And what Poirot suspected was genuine terror. The 6th guest, pacing near the French doors, was Captain Arthur Trent, a decorated, war veteran whose clean uniform and confident manner contrasted starkly with the tremor in his breath. Poirot stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said gently, "I am Hercule Poirot. I have been summoned to Hawthorne Manor. May I assume that Lady Evelyn Hawthorne is the unfortunate victim who lies before us?" Lord Hawthorne stiffened. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. My wife, she collapsed after dinner. Dr. Reed believes she was poisoned." Poirot approached the chaise slowly. He lifted the blanket and looked upon Lady Evelyn's face. Even in death, she retained a kind of delicate beauty. Soft curls framing her cheeks, elegantly arched brows, and lips tinged with that faint violet shade that spoke volumes to Poirot. Her hands were folded over her torso, but he noticed the faint indentation on one wrist where a bracelet had been removed. "Tell me," Poirot said softly, still looking at the body, "was this bracelet removed after her collapse?" Lord Hawthorne hesitated. "Yes, it was snagging on the blanket. Someone took it off." But his tone lacked conviction. Poirot noted this. "And where is it now?" No one answered. He stood and began pacing slowly, taking the room in, observing the minute, telling details others overlooked. A toppled champagne flute on the rug, a smudge of lipstick on its rim, the faint odour, sweet, deceptive, of almonds. Ah! Poirot felt the first click of logic. He turned to the guests. "Before we proceed further, I must ask each of you to remain within this room until I give permission otherwise." His tone, though calm, brooked no debate. "A lady has died under suspicious circumstances, and it is my duty to examine all possibilities." Beatrice suddenly stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, please, you must find out what happened to my aunt. She was perfectly fine at dinner, laughing, chatting, enjoying herself. And then she touched her glass. One sip, one. Her voice broke. Claudia Mayfield, the woman in emerald, interjected sharply. And what of it? People collapse for all sorts of reasons. Poor health, shock, age. Lady Evelyn was 42. Edwin Stone cut in timidly. And in excellent health. Claudia shot him a glare. I'm merely saying we cannot simply assume. Poirot raised a hand. Madame, you need not fear. I make no assumptions. I follow only the evidence. He turned to Dr. Reed. You observed the victim firsthand. Tell me your conclusions. Dr. Reed cleared his throat. Her pulse was weak, then vanished entirely. Her lips discoloured in a manner consistent with cyanide poisoning. I smelled almonds. Poirot nodded. And the glass she sipped from? Right there. The doctor pointed to the fallen champagne flute. Poirot bent, examining the glass without touching it. The lipstick smear was deep crimson, not smudged, meaning the vial had been lifted to her lips only once. He sniffed cautiously. The faint but unmistakable scent confirmed it. He straightened. The poison was administered in the drink, but whether it was placed in the glass before it arrived or added after, that, mes amis, remains to be discovered. Lord Hawthorne's composure cracked. Poirot, tell me plainly, do you believe my wife was murdered? Poirot held his gaze. Yes. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Claudia gasped. Beatrice sobbed quietly. Captain Trent cursed under his breath. Edwin Stone nearly dropped his folder. And Lord Hawthorne's face drained of all colour. Poirot continued, But let us not leap to conclusions. Each of you was present at dinner, each of you had proximity to Lady Evelyn, and each of you no doubt possesses secrets unknown to the others. Claudia bristled. Are you suggesting? I suggest nothing, madame. I ask only questions. Poirot moved toward the fireplace, warming his gloved hands as though pondering, but his mind was moving like a clockwork machine. Tell me, Lord Hawthorne, what was the nature of the gathering this evening? A celebration, a private event? Alistair Hawthorne exhaled shakily. A reunion of sorts. Old friends, family. My wife wished to announce something tonight. His throat tightened. A charitable foundation in her name. Poirot raised a brow. And did she succeed in making this announcement? No. She collapsed before she could. Interesting. Claudia suddenly spoke, her voice sharp as glass. Inspector, surely you must question the servants as well. They move among the guests constantly. They pour the drinks. They serve the meals. Anyone could have... Poirot interrupted softly. Madame, the guilty often seek to widen the circle of suspicion. She froze. Captain Trent stepped forward. Inspector, I should say something. At dinner, Lady Evelyn and Mr. Stone had a private conversation, heated. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was tense. Edwin Stone snapped. That is absurd. Lady Evelyn merely asked for legal advice regarding her foundation, nothing more. Poirot watched them both carefully. Oui, secrets indeed. He turned to Beatrice. And you, mademoiselle, did you observe anything unusual? Beatrice wiped her eyes. Aunt Eveline seemed distracted, almost troubled. She kept touching her bracelet, the emerald one. It was a gift from her mother. She never removed it, not even while sleeping. Poirot felt another click of logic. The missing bracelet, the removed bracelet, the sentimental bracelet, too important to ignore. He approached the chaise once more and knelt beside the body, examining Lady Evelyn's wrist. The indentation was too fresh, too precise. Someone had removed the bracelet after she fell unconscious, but before the doctor examined her. Poirot stood and turned to the guests. Mes amis, he said softly but with weight, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne was poisoned deliberately. And within this room stands the person responsible. A collective gasp erupted. Poirot lifted a hand, silencing them. His voice dropped to a near whisper, yet carried unmistakable authority. "But fear not. Hercule Poirot shall unravel this knot of lies and motives, and he shall begin," his eyes swept across each trembling face, "with the curious case of the missing emerald bracelet." He paused, studying their expressions. Someone flinched. Poirot saw it. His eyes gleamed. "Mes amis," he said calmly, "the investigation begins now." Chapter 2. Whispers beneath the chandeliers. A hush had fallen over Hawthorne Manor, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed against the velvet-lined walls like an unwelcome presence. The grand chandelier hanging in the central hall, its many crystals glimmering with cold fire, seemed to listen, its shimmering shards casting fractured reflections on the tense faces of those gathered below. After the shocking declaration from Hercule Poirot that Lady Evelyn's death was no accident, the manor's atmosphere thickened, as though every breath drawn was tainted by suspicion. Servants moved silently along the corridors with lowered eyes. Doors were shut with exaggerated gentleness, and the house's many clocks ticked with an eerie, echoing insistence. Time itself felt watchful. Poirot, moving with deliberate calm, walked to the centre of the hall. The guests followed like uneasy shadows. His small stature did not diminish his commanding presence. Rather, it sharpened it, for every gesture he made, every measured step, suggested a mind in perfect control, quietly tightening invisible strings around the truth. He paused beneath the chandelier, glancing upward thoughtfully as though the crystals themselves whispered secrets to him. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but edged with steel, "you understand that what follows will not be pleasant. Murder is never a comfortable subject, even for those innocent of it." Claudia Mayfield scoffed gently, though her fingers twitched. "I think we all grasp the gravity already, Monsieur Poirot. Must we truly linger in these halls like prisoners?" Poirot turned his head slowly toward her. "But of course, madame, the guilty always dislikes confinement." A flush crept up Claudia's neck, and she stiffened. Captain Trent, watching from the side, narrowed his eyes at her. Lord Hawthorne, standing rigidly near the balustrade, cleared his throat but said nothing. Grief had etched deep lines on his face in a matter of hours. And yet Poirot wondered, as he always did, how much of that grief was pure, and how much born of fear. Poirot tapped his cane lightly against the polished floor. "We shall begin by retracing the final hours of Lady Evelyn Hawthorne. Each of you, I am certain, observed details that seemed unimportant at the time, but may now prove most crucial. Remember, mes amis, in the smallest of details lies the greatest of truths." He signalled for them to follow him into the drawing-room adjacent to the hall. The room glowed with warm lamplight. Deep mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books. A large portrait of Lady Evelyn hung above the mantelpiece, her serene face and soft gaze a haunting contrast to the tragedy that now gripped the manor. Poirot stood before it with hands clasped lightly. "Such a face," he murmured, "a woman of elegance, yes, but also of great determination. She does not strike me as one easily defeated by life." Beatrice Hawthorne, standing near the doorway, whispered, "Aunt Eveline was strong. She helped so many people. I don't understand why anyone would want to hurt her." Poirot turned gently toward her. "Mademoiselle, that is precisely what we must discover." He motioned toward the large circular table in the room, urging the guests to sit. Only Claudia hesitated before joining reluctantly, smoothing her emerald dress as if to signal she had nothing to hide. Captain Trent sat with his arms crossed, jaw clenched. Edwin Stone perched at the edge of his chair, looking as though he might faint at any moment. Dr. Reed cleaned his spectacles once more, a nervous gesture Poirot filed away in his mind. Lord Hawthorne settled last, lowering himself heavily into a chair, as though the seat itself bore the weight of his sorrow. Poirot remained standing. "Now," he began, "let us discuss the dinner. Please recount everything that occurred, from the moment you entered the dining hall to the moment Lady Evelyn collapsed." There was a brief silence before Captain Trent spoke first. "We gathered around 8 o'clock. Drinks were served. Champagne, I believe. Lady Evelyn was in excellent spirits. She made a toast." Poirot nodded. "And did each of you receive champagne from the same bottle?" Beatrice responded, "Yes, I believe so. The footman poured each glass from one bottle, except what, mademoiselle?" Poirot pressed gently. "Except Aunt Eveline's," she continued hesitantly. "She preferred to drink from her personal bottle. It was a French vintage she adored. She kept a few bottles for special occasions." Poirot stiffened slightly, though it was almost imperceptible. "And where was this bottle kept?" "In the locked cabinet near the kitchen," Beatrice answered. "Only Aunt Eveline and the butler had the key." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Très intéressant. And who retrieved the bottle tonight?" Beatrice pointed to Claudia. "She did." Claudia's head whipped toward her. "I most certainly did not retrieve— Oh," she paused, remembering. I suppose I did. Eveline asked me to. She said she trusted me not to mishandle it. I thought nothing of it." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did anyone accompany you, madame?" "No," Claudia replied, though her voice trembled. "I went alone." "So," Poirot said, stepping closer, "you were the only person who handled Lady Evelyn's bottle before she drank from it?" A hush filled the room. Even the fire seemed to diminish to a gentle crackle, waiting for her answer. Claudia swallowed hard. "Yes, but that does not mean I—" Poirot lifted a hand. "Do not distress yourself, madame. I make no accusations. I simply gather facts." Lord Hawthorne spoke suddenly, his deep voice breaking through the tension. "Poirot, surely you do not believe Claudia would harm Evelyn? They were dear friends." Poirot's voice was gentle. "In cases of murder, mon ami, friendship often proves far more complicated than it appears." Claudia turned her face away, anger flaring visibly in her eyes. Poirot resumed, and after the toast, Edwin Stone cleared his throat. "Lady Evelyn spoke quietly to me about her foundation. She wanted to make some amendments to her will, only minor adjustments, mind you. She mentioned wanting to secure funds for Beatrice as well." Beatrice looked up in surprise. "She never told me that." "She intended it as a gift, my dear," Stone replied. Poirot leaned a fraction closer. "And what was the nature of these amendments?" Stone hesitated. "Financial reallocations, nothing unusual." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur, it is a most curious thing that alterations to a will are often accompanied by motives for murder." He allowed the implication to hang in the air. Stone paled. Dr. Reed finally spoke. After the toast, the courses were served. Lady Evelyn ate very little, claiming she had eaten too many sweets earlier. But she drank her champagne. A single sip, and then she began to cough, clutching her throat. I rushed to her side, but— He exhaled, defeated. "It was too late." Poirot nodded gravely. "And no one touched her glass after she fell?" Captain Trent answered, "No. It fell from her hand, and none of us dared touch it." Poirot shifted, pacing slowly. "Then the poison was either in the bottle or added after Claudia retrieved it." Claudia bristled. "Do you mean to say—" Poirot held up a hand again. "I mean to say nothing yet, madame." He turned toward the doorway. "May I speak to the butler? I wish to confirm the security of the cabinet." But as if on cue, a soft cough sounded near the entrance. There stood Mr. Giles, the butler, an elderly, dignified man with white sideburns and a sombre expression. Poirot beckoned him inside. "Monsieur Giles, you hold the only other key to the cabinet containing Lady Eveline's preferred champagne. Tell me, was the cabinet disturbed this evening?" Mr. Giles bowed his head. "No, sir. I checked it before dinner. It was locked, as always." "And who asked for it to be opened?" "Lady Evelyn herself sent word through Claudia Mayfield." Poirot nodded. "And you handed Claudia the bottle?" "I did, sir." Poirot examined him closely. "Tell me, did you notice anything unusual about the bottle? Tampering, perhaps? A loosened cork?" Mr. Giles frowned deeply. "Now that you mention it, sir, the cork did seem slightly imperfect, not broken, but I remember thinking it sat strangely." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You did not find this concerning? I assumed it was from age, sir. The bottle was several years old." Poirot inhaled sharply. "Age does not create imperfection in sealed corks. Only interference does." A shiver rippled through the room. Poirot stepped back, looking at each of them with intense scrutiny. "Mes amis, what we have here is a most delicate construction of opportunity, secrecy, and carefully planned deception. Someone tampered with that bottle before dinner. Someone who had access to the cabinet or access to the key." His gaze slid to Claudia first, then to Lord Hawthorne, then to Mr. Giles. Noticing the shift in the air, Beatrice spoke softly. "Monsieur Poirot, you mentioned earlier that Aunt Eveline's bracelet was missing. Do you think the person who poisoned her also took the bracelet?" Poirot turned to her slowly. "Mademoiselle, I believe the bracelet is the key. It was removed shortly after her collapse. Why? Because inside that bracelet, although none of you may know this, Lady Eveline kept something very valuable." Shock swept across their faces. Lord Hawthorne whispered hoarsely, "Poirot, how could you know that?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Because, mon ami, I observe. The bracelet's indentation was too deep for mere ornamentation. It was hollow, a miniature locket, and Lady Eveline touched it frequently tonight, did she not? A sign of nervous habit. She carried something inside it. Perhaps a note, a document, a secret she feared revealing." The room trembled with unspoken dread. Poirot's voice fell to a murmur, slow and deliberate. "And whoever stole that bracelet stole it for what it contained. Murder was only the means." A collective gasp filled the drawing room. Poirot stepped beneath the shimmering chandelier once more, twisting the end of his moustache thoughtfully as the crystals flickered like dozens of watchful eyes. "Mes amis," he said finally, "the killer knew Lady Eveline was about to reveal something tonight, something that threatened them." He paused, letting the silence stretch, taut as a wire, and that, Poirot concluded, is why she had to die. Chapter 3. A Toast Turned Lethal. The night deepened around Hawthorne Manor, the storm outside lashing violently against the window panes as though nature itself demanded to be heard. Inside, Hercule Poirot moved with quiet intent, retracing the moments before Lady Eveline's collapse with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed gemstone. The dining hall now stood empty, long after the guests had dispersed under Poirot's instruction. Only the faint scent of extinguished candles lingered, mingling with an acrid trace of something far more sinister. The metallic tang of poison, subtle yet unmistakably present to his keen senses. The table remained set as it had during dinner, crystal goblets reflecting the dying embers of the fireplace, silverware perfectly aligned, except for the one overturned glass, still resting where it had fallen from Lady Evelyn's trembling hand. Poirot approached it slowly. He crouched beside the fallen champagne flute, observing the residue at the bottom. The poison had been swift and targeted, a sign of someone not merely desperate, but confident in their method. Real poisoners, in Poirot's experience, were rarely impulsive. They planned, they studied, they anticipated every possible outcome. Whoever had done this had intended for Eveline to drink from her personal bottle and no other. A toast had turned lethal indeed. He rose to his feet just as Inspector Graves entered the room. A tall, stern-faced man with deep-set eyes, Graves carried an air of skepticism wherever he went, particularly when dealing with Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," he muttered, glancing around the room, "I hope you're not disturbing the crime scene." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Inspector, I disturb nothing. I merely observe." Graves folded his arms. "You've taken charge rather quickly. Might I remind you that this is my jurisdiction?" Poirot smiled gently. "But of course. And yet, it is your good fortune that I am here, n'est-ce pas? Poisoners are tricky creatures. They dress their motives well and hide their tracks with even greater skill." Graves grumbled under his breath but did not argue. "What have you found?" Poirot gestured toward the glass. "The poison was likely slipped into the bottle before dinner. Whoever did this had knowledge of the wine cabinet, the key, and Lady Evelyn's habits." Graves frowned. "Her habits?" "Oui," Poirot replied. "She always drank from her personal vintage, and never allowed anyone else to pour it. A woman of routine is easy to predict, and easier still to kill." Graves exhaled sharply. "So we're looking for someone who knew her well." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Someone who knew her well, or someone who studied her from the shadows? Graves eyed him suspiciously. "You have someone in mind." Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he walked toward the head of the table, the place Evelyn had sat, and placed a hand on the high-backed chair. "Every murder," he said softly, "is a story, and every story begins with motive." He turned to Graves. "Let us consider who stood to gain the most from her death." Graves opened his notebook. "Her niece, Beatrice, stands to inherit a fair sum. Claudia Mayfield retrieved the bottle. Lord Hawthorne benefits reputationally and financially from her estate. Edwin Stone had access to her legal documents. Dr. Reed could procure poison. Captain Trent has a history of gambling and debt." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Excellent, you see, Inspector. Every person present tonight had a reason, however small." Graves raised an eyebrow. "Even the butler?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, do not underestimate the servants, mon ami. They observe far more than they reveal." He paused near the ornamental sideboard, studying the empty champagne bottle resting upright, its cork placed beside it. With careful fingers, he lifted the cork and inspected it under the lamplight. A tiny puncture, almost invisible, marred the otherwise smooth surface. "There," Poirot whispered. "A needle, perhaps. A thin injection. Someone tampered with the bottle without removing the cork completely." Graves leaned closer, "which means the poison wasn't added during dinner. It was prepared beforehand." "Oui. Hours, perhaps days earlier." Graves's expression turned grim. "That narrows our list." Poirot placed the cork down gently. "Not enough yet. The killer was clever. They planted the poison but relied on Eveline's predictable habits. They made no attempt to alter anything else on the table. They trusted her routine to do the work for them." Graves frowned again. "Then why steal the bracelet afterward?" Poirot turned, his face darkening thoughtfully. Because the bracelet contained a secret, one that threatened the killer. And Lady Evelyn, I suspect, planned to reveal that secret tonight. He stepped away from the table, his mind circling the possibilities. Eveline had been anxious throughout the evening, glancing repeatedly at her wrist, touching the bracelet as if for reassurance. She had pulled Claudia aside at one point. Poirot had seen it from the corner of his eye. And later, she had whispered something to Edwin Stone, who had looked startled but composed. Poirot moved to the nearest window, observing his reflection faintly superimposed over the storm outside. "Inspector Graves," he said quietly, "this murder is not merely about money. It is about fear." Graves straightened. "Fear?" Poirot nodded. "Oui. A fear so great that the killer risked everything. A fear born from something Evelyn knew, something she discovered, something she was prepared to expose." He turned sharply. "Tell me, Inspector, has the staff been questioned yet?" "Not fully," Graves replied. "The storm delayed half the officers." Poirot flicked a hand dismissively. "We do not need many officers, we need clarity. Bring me Mr. Giles, the butler, and the maid who attended the dinner preparations." "The maid? Why her?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, it is always the maid who sees what others overlook." Within minutes, Mr. Giles returned, his posture stiff and respectful. Beside him stood a timid young maid named Lila, her eyes darting nervously. Poirot approached her with a kind smile. "Mademoiselle Lila, do not be afraid. I require only honesty. During dinner preparations, did you observe anything unusual near the wine cabinet?" Lila hesitated. Then, trembling slightly, she said, "Sir, I saw the cabinet open mid-afternoon." Both Poirot and Graves froze. Poirot leaned in gently. "Who opened it?" I don't know," she stammered. "I only heard footsteps leaving. When I checked, the cabinet door was swinging shut." "And you told no one?" I didn't think it mattered. I thought perhaps Mr. Giles forgot to lock it." Mr. Giles bristled. "I never forget to lock it." Poirot's eyes sharpened like a blade. Someone had accessed the cabinet before dinner. Someone who knew their way around the manor. Someone who moved quietly. He stepped back, folding his hands. "Inspector Graves," Poirot murmured. "The killer prepared hours earlier. Eva's death was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of patience." He turned toward the dining table once more, his voice low and controlled. "And now the killer will grow restless, because they do not yet know what Evelyn discovered, or whether she told someone." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Soon they will make their next move." Chapter 4. Suspects in Silk and Shadows. The storm outside had grown into a wild, drumming tempest, its icy fingers rattling the window panes as though demanding entry into the already shaken household. Inside the great hall of Hawthorne Manor, the lights flickered, throwing long, shifting shadows across portraits of Hawthorne ancestors, whose solemn painted eyes seemed to watch every movement with grave suspicion. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of that cavernous space, hands folded neatly behind his back, gaze calm yet razor-sharp as he summoned the assembled guests, each of whom now stood as a potential murderer. One by one, they gathered before him like actors summoned to the stage. Their elegant attire, silks, brocades, tailored coats, glimmered beneath the chandelier, but those polished surfaces could not conceal the strain tightening their expressions. Grief for Lady Evelyn's death was present, yes, but stronger still was the palpable tension of people afraid of implication, afraid of each other, and perhaps most tellingly, afraid of what Poirot might already know. He first addressed Lord Adrian Hawthorne, the grieving widower whose tall frame now appeared diminished under the weight of sudden bereavement. His usually composed demeanour had splintered into a brittle mess of pacing steps and abrupt sighs. His hands trembled despite visible effort to still them. "Lord Hawthorne," Poirot began, voice smooth as polished marble, "you were the last to speak with your wife before the unfortunate incident. Might you recount those moments?" Adrian's throat bobbed. She was anxious," he murmured. "The upcoming charity gala, the pressure, the guests. She mentioned feeling dizzy. I assumed it was fatigue." He paused, eyes darting toward the parlour door, as though he could still see her lying there. "Poirot, I adored her. You must know that." Poirot's brow lifted slightly. "Adoration, mon ami, does not preclude desperation. Wealth, reputation, affairs of the heart, these can disturb even the noblest of men." Adrian flinched, though whether from guilt or outrage, no one could tell. Next, Poirot turned toward Dr. Miriam Vale, the household physician and an old friend of Lady Evelyn. She stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her dark bobbed hair neatly arranged despite the chaos around her. She possessed an unsettling calm that suggested poise, or perhaps secrecy. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you were first to examine Lady Evelyn. Your observations." Miriam's voice was crisp. The symptoms were unmistakable: rapid onset paralysis, constricted pupils, discoloration. A toxin, certainly, but the means and timing. She exhaled sharply. Whoever administered it had access to her glass, or her inhalant. It happened quickly, too quickly. Poirot nodded. "And you, a doctor familiar with toxins, are unsurprisingly knowledgeable." A shadow crossed her features. "Are you implying—" Poirot lifted a hand. "I imply nothing yet, but facts must be inspected from every angle." Behind Miriam, Selene Grey, Lady Evelyn's personal companion, hovered like a trembling shadow. Her pale eyes were rimmed with red from weeping, her fingers twisting nervously with the hem of her sleeve. "Miss Grey," Poirot addressed her gently, "you served Lady Evelyn more closely than anyone tonight. Did she speak of any fears, any quarrels, any secrets?" Selene nodded uncertainly. "She was frightened earlier," she whispered. "I found her pacing in the parlour before the guests arrived. She said she felt watched." Her lips quivered. "But I thought it was the storm affecting her nerves. Had I known—" Her voice broke as she pressed a hand against her mouth. Poirot studied her carefully. Genuine fear or well-performed sorrow, either could be true. Then came Damien Hartcliffe, the polished banker with a reputation for charm that glittered only on the surface. He stood with one hand in his pocket, the other resting on a silvered cane, his smile strained but still present. Only Poirot seemed to notice how his eyes darted with calculated precision from one guest to another, as though assessing risk. "Monsieur Hartcliffe," Poirot said, "your dealings with Lady Evelyn's charities are well known. Financial disagreements, however, can lead to complications." Damien chuckled lightly. "Poirot, you wound me. Evelyn and I shared a strictly professional relationship. Yes, she disagreed with some of my restructuring proposals, but murder? Hardly my style." "Styles do change," Poirot murmured, "when fortunes are at stake." Damien's charming smile faltered just a fraction. The final suspect was Lady Verona Blythe, a socialite adored by the press yet notorious among acquaintances for her jealousy and unpredictable temper. She lounged near the staircase, silk gown cascading like molten silver, her expression a mixture of boredom and irritation. Her beauty was striking, but Poirot knew better than to be softened by appearances. "Lady Verona," he said, "you and Lady Evelyn were rivals, no? Your recent altercation at the winter charity brunch was quite public." Verona's eyes narrowed. "She humiliated me," she snapped. "But that doesn't mean I killed her. I came tonight to mend things. Clearly, I was too late." Poirot clasped his hands, strolling slowly along the semicircle the suspects formed, the tap of his shoes echoing. "So," he mused aloud, "we have a grieving husband with financial troubles, a doctor with access to toxins, a companion who feared shadows, a banker entangled in questionable dealings, and a socialite with a bruised ego." A soft murmur rippled across the room. Defensive, anxious, uncertain. Poirot stopped in place, gaze sharp. "But murder, mes amis, is never simple. It is a tapestry woven from motive, opportunity, and intellect." As he spoke, the lights flickered again. A crack of thunder split the sky outside. One of the maids shrieked as the chandelier dimmed dangerously low before stabilizing. Poirot continued unfazed. "Each of you claims innocence, yet one among you prepared a plan cold and deliberate. One among you approached Lady Evelyn at her most vulnerable moment. One among you ensured no one noticed the act." He turned toward the parlor door, where the faint scent of lavender still drifted through. "But rest assured, Poirot sees more than you think, and soon the truth will emerge from the shadows." A tense silence followed, broken only by the drumming of rain. Then, without warning, a piercing cry echoed from the upper corridor, a sound filled with terror. All heads snapped upward. Poirot's eyes gleamed sharply. "Ah," he murmured, "the killer grows nervous." The chapter ends as Poirot swiftly moves toward the staircase, suspects trailing behind like ghosts in silk and shadow, unaware that the next revelation would change the entire direction of the investigation. Chapter 5. The hidden letter in the parlor. The scream from the upper corridor pulled Poirot and the guests into a frantic rush up the sweeping staircase, their footsteps beating urgently against the polished wood. The lights flickered again as they reached the landing, but the source of the shriek, a terrified young maid, stood pointing toward a half-open door with trembling hands. Her face was ghost-pale, eyes wide as moonlit saucers. Poirot approached her with slow, calming steps. "Mademoiselle, what frightens you?" "To the window," she stammered. "Someone opened it. Footprints on the balcony, fresh ones. I thought I saw someone watching us from outside." Poirot exchanged a glance with Inspector Burrows, who had just arrived. The storm made it impossible for anyone to travel far unnoticed, yet the idea of an intruder crawling around the manor's balconies was troubling indeed. Burrows examined the footprints with a lantern, though the lashing rain had already begun to smear them into indistinguishable marks. "Could be one of the guests sneaking about," Burrows muttered, "or the murderer returning to hide something." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, or retrieving something. A guilty conscience often compels a fool to tidy their crime." But Poirot's instincts tugged at him, an uneasy whisper that whatever had rattled the maid was connected not to upstairs, but to the parlor itself. A detail gnawed at him. Lady Evelyn's hand, when he'd first examined her, had been slightly curled, as though grasping something. Yet nothing had been found at the scene. He turned on his heel. "Mes amis, we return below. The answer lies not in the shadows of the upper floor, but in the room where the tragedy occurred." The group, tense and reluctant, descended again. The parlor felt colder now, the fire mere embers casting faint orange glows across the carpet. Lady Eveline's body had already been moved, yet her presence lingered in the air like a fragile perfume. Poirot walked to the chaise where she had lain, dropping gracefully to one knee. He ran his fingers lightly along the embroidered fabric, then beneath the cushions. His movements were gentle, almost reverent, as though expecting the room itself to speak if handled delicately enough. Then, with a soft click, his hand brushed against a gap in the wooden framing. "Ah," he breathed. He reached inside and withdrew a slim, sealed envelope. The room collectively inhaled. Poirot rose, examining the envelope beneath the faint light. It bore no formal stamp, just Lady Eveline's elegant handwriting on the front, "To be found only if I am in danger." A shockwave rippled through the group. Lord Hawthorne stepped forward, voice cracking. "I've never seen that letter. Why would Veline—" Poirot raised a hand to silence him. "We must respect the privacy of the deceased, but in matters of murder, privacy must bow to justice." Carefully, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes skimmed the page, his expression shifting only subtly. First curiosity, then deep concern, and finally a quiet, grim understanding. After a long moment, he looked up. Lady Eveline suspected someone close to her, Poirot announced, someone she believed capable of harming her. Gasps burst from several throats. Céline took a step back, tears forming again. Damien's jaw tightened. Verona scoffed, though her fingers fidgeted with her necklace. Adrian closed his eyes as though bracing himself. Barrows stepped closer. "Well, who did she accuse?" Poirot tapped the letter gently with 2 fingers. "It does not give a name, only a description. She writes of receiving anonymous threats. Notes slipped beneath her door. Warnings whispered during charity. Events. A sense that she was being followed. She believed someone wanted control of her finances, or wished to silence her." "Silence her from what?" Verona demanded, folding her arms. Poirot glanced down at the letter again. Lady Eveline discovered a scheme involving her estates and charity funds. She does not specify details, but she mentions one phrase, the parlour ledger. Damien paled noticeably. She kept a ledger? Poirot's gaze sharpened. Oui, a record of transactions written in her private shorthand, and according to this letter, she hid it somewhere safe, somewhere only she would think to look. Adrian swallowed hard. Poirot? What if the person who killed her was trying to find that ledger? Poirot nodded solemnly. Just so. The intruder on the balcony may have been searching for it, or perhaps someone among us already has it. Burroughs looked around sharply. Search the guests' rooms? Poirot lifted a finger. No, Inspector. Rashness is the enemy of reason. Instead, we must first deduce where Lady Eveline would hide something precious. He paced slowly, his mind working with swift precision. She feared someone inside the manor. She wrote this letter secretly. She placed it beneath the chaise cushion, clever but temporary. A ledger, however, that required something more symbolic, something sentimental. Céline sniffed softly. She loved this house, especially this room. She once told me the parlour held all her happiest memories. Poirot stopped abruptly. Say that again. Céline blinked. She loved this room. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A room of memories, a ledger of truths. A woman of sentiment would conceal her secrets within something equally sentimental. He moved to the far corner of the parlour, where a grand portrait of Lady Eveline and Adrian hung above a small walnut cabinet. Poirot touched the frame lightly, then pushed, and the portrait swung open like a door. Inside was a shallow alcove, and within it, wrapped in blue silk, was a small leather-bound book. The parlour ledger, Poirot declared. The room erupted, gasps, denials, nervous muttering. Adrian ran a shaking hand through his hair. Damien's face blanched to chalk. Miriam pressed her lips together in a thin, unreadable line. Poirot opened the ledger to its final entries. His eyes scanned the handwriting. Then he closed the book gently. "This is the motive," he said quietly. "Lady Eveline discovered a betrayal, one that threatened her name, her fortune, and her future. And someone here feared what she knew." Silence clamped down on the room like a vice. Poirot stepped back, his voice low, steady and grave. "And now, mes amis, we must uncover who among you has already crossed the line from deceit to murder." Chapter 6. Secrets Fermented in the Cellar. The storm's howl deepened, as if the very sky sought to warn those inside Hawthorne Manor that the night had not yet surrendered its darkest secrets. The discovery of the parlour ledger sent the manor into a spiralling hush, each guest shrinking into themselves, knowing the revelations within that slim leather book could destroy reputations, fortunes, and possibly expose a murderer. Inspector Burrows locked it away temporarily in his satchel, but the weight of its contents pressed heavily on every mind. Poirot, however, remained unshaken. His gaze swept the room, quietly measuring reactions, the tremor in Damien's hands, the tight press of Miriam's lips, the way Adrian's eyes refused to meet anyone's, the shiver of fear trailing down Seleni's posture, the calculated stillness of Lady Verona. Clues, each one, though incomplete. Then Poirot spoke, voice calm but commanding. "Mes amis, we must continue. The truth rarely rests in parlours and drawing rooms. It lurks where people believe no one will look." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. "Where do we go now?" Adrian asked, exhaustion lining his voice. Poirot turned toward the corridor. "To the cellar, Lord Hawthorne. I suspect Lady Eveline spent time there recently." Burrows frowned. "The cellar? What for?" Poirot tapped his temple gently. "Because Lady Eveline was a woman who hid her emotions behind grace. And when a lady keeps her secrets in a ledger, she keeps her fears where no one would expect. Come, Inspector, we must follow the threads she left behind." The procession moved reluctantly, following Poirot through the hall and down the narrow, spiralling staircase that led into the manor's underbelly. The deeper they descended, the colder the air grew, damp, heavy, and carrying a faint, bitter scent of aged oak and earth. The cellar door groaned when Burrows pushed it open, releasing a draught that extinguished the nearest candle. Inside, rows upon rows of dusty wine racks stretched into the dimness. Shadows clung to the corners like lurking creatures, fed by the flickering lantern light. Wooden crates lay stacked haphazardly, some marked with dates from decades past, others unmarked entirely. A perfect place for secrets to ferment unnoticed. Poirot stepped ahead, inspecting the room with an intensity that made the guests uneasy. "Notice," he said quietly, "the dust. It reveals who comes and who goes." He pointed to a particular aisle, one rack noticeably cleaner than the others. "This way." Selene shuddered. "She came here recently. Alone?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, and not just once." They followed him until he stopped before a locked iron gate separating the wine shelves from a small private tasting room. Burrows tried the handle. The lock wouldn't budge. "Let me fetch a key," Adrian began. "No need," Poirot murmured. He knelt, examining the lock closely. Within seconds he produced a thin wire from his pocket and coaxed the mechanism open with a soft click. "Mon Dieu," Verona muttered, "you carry lockpicks." Poirot smiled faintly. A detective must be prepared. Inside the private tasting room, a small table sat overturned, one chair knocked aside. The lantern light revealed scuff marks on the stone floor, as though someone had struggled here. Poirot crouched, tracing the marks with a gloved fingertip. "A confrontation," he said softly. "Lady Evelyn met someone here. She confronted them with what she knew, perhaps something from the ledger." Damien swallowed hard. "She kept a secret meeting in a wine cellar. Why?" "Privacy," Poirot answered. "The parlour is watched, the hallways full of ears. But down here, behind racks of aging wine, one might whisper without fear." Miriam stepped forward. "If she argued with someone down here, the intruder upstairs might have been searching for evidence she hid." Poirot nodded. "Possibly, but let us see what she left behind." He scanned the shelves, then paused before an empty space. The dust outline showed that a bottle had once rested there, recently removed. Poirot lifted his lantern higher. The faintest imprint of a hand smeared the dust beside the gap. "A missing bottle?" Burroughs muttered, "in a cellar full of hundreds." Poirot tilted his head. "Not just any bottle. Observe its shape, its dust outline. A vintage from the Hawthorne Private Reserve. Rare, expensive, and sentimental." Adrian blinked. "Sentimental?" Poirot looked directly at him. "Oui. A bottle you gifted Evelyn on your 5th anniversary, engraved." Adrian's face drained of colour. I didn't know she kept it here." "Oh, she kept it," Poirot murmured, "and she used it. The bottle has been taken recently, likely by the murderer." Verona crossed her arms. "Then why take a wine bottle? What significance does it hold?" Poirot gave a soft hum. "Because sometimes, my lady, secrets are hidden not in books, but in glass." He began searching the nearby crates and shelves, moving with surprising speed for a man so meticulous. After a few tense minutes, Poirot stopped abruptly and turned toward a small wooden box tucked behind several dusty casks. He opened it slowly. Inside was a velvet pouch. Beneath the velvet rested a delicate silver vial, empty. The air tightened. Poirot held it up, a vial consistent with toxins used in certain medical compounds. "Dr. Vale, perhaps you recognize the design?" Miriam stiffened. I've seen similar vials, yes, but that doesn't mean—" Poirot's eyes flicked to her. "It means only that someone knew how to use such things. Lady Evelyn hid this vial down here in fear. She knew she had uncovered a plot involving poison." Damien stepped back, stumbling slightly. "This is madness. Anyone could have planted it." "True," Poirot replied calmly, "which is why there is more." He reached again into the wooden box and retrieved a folded piece of paper. "Another note," he said softly, "written by Lady Evelyn." Adrian nearly collapsed. "What does it say?" Poirot unfolded it and read aloud. "If I risk revealing the truth, he will use the cellar. He watches the accounts and fears discovery." Silence hit the room like a blow. "He?" Burroughs repeated. "She names a man?" Poirot folded the note slowly. "It would appear so." Celine gasped. Verona stiffened. Miriam inhaled sharply. Damien looked as though words had abandoned him entirely. Adrian whispered, her voice breaking, "Poirot, please, do you believe I—" Poirot raised a hand. "No assumptions yet. The letter is vague. It could be any man among us." The lantern flickered. Poirot stepped back, eyes thoughtful, expression grave. "Mes amis, the killer met Lady Evelyn here, beneath the earth, in shadows and silence. The motive is tied to accounts, figures, finances." His gaze swept the room. Someone feared her discovery enough to poison her, and the next clue will reveal who that man is. A cold draught swept through the cellar, as if the manor exhaled the truth it still held tightly. Poirot straightened, lantern raised. "The game grows clearer," he said, "and the murderer grows desperate." Chapter 7. Whispers Behind Locked Doors. The storm raged with renewed fury as the group ascended from the cellar, each footstep echoing with uncertainty. What had begun as a tragedy was quickly shaping into a labyrinth of betrayals and hidden motives. Poirot's lantern dimmed with every gust of wind from the draughty hallways, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the manor walls. The tension grew so thick that even the creaking of old floorboards felt like a whispered confession. Poirot halted near the landing, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Mes amis, the time has come not only to uncover secrets, but to understand their keepers. Each of you hides something. Perhaps not murder, but deception nonetheless. And in unravelling your lies, we approach the truth. Inspector Burrows rubbed his hands together, exhaling sharply. Which of them do we question first? Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. Not question, Inspector, observe. A locked room often reveals more than an open confession. Burrows frowned, but followed as Poirot led the group toward the east wing of the manor, a quieter, more intimate corridor where the guest bedrooms rested behind heavy oak doors. The storm outside seemed especially loud here, drumming its warning onto the high windows. Poirot stopped before the first door. Damien Hartcliffe's room. Damien tensed. Really, Poirot? Searching rooms now? Poirot smiled politely. We do not search. We look. A distinction most important. If you object, monsieur, you may refuse, but refusal speaks. Damien hesitated only a breath. Fine. Look all you want. They entered. Damien's room was immaculate. Too immaculate. Not a paper out of place, not a wrinkle in the bedspread. Poirot immediately sensed deliberate order, a room cleansed of personality. Pristine, Poirot murmured, gliding his fingers over the polished desk. Either you are a man of remarkable neatness, or you removed something recently. Damien frowned. I like things orderly. Nothing more sinister than that. Poirot replied. And yet your ledger dealings with Lady Evelyn were far from orderly, no? She objected to your proposed restructuring. A polite term for siphoning funds? Damien's jaw tightened. I advised her to move certain assets for protection. She refused, that is all. Poirot nodded, though the doubt in his eyes remained sharp as a blade. Very well. Let us continue. The next room belonged to Dr. Miriam Vale. Her space was the opposite of Damien's. Papers stacked on tables, medical kits half open, notebooks scattered. A faint aroma of herbs and antiseptics lingered in the air. Burrows raised a brow. Quite a collection, Doctor. Miriam forced a smile. I was reviewing some medical research. Poirot examined the vials on her bedside table. Research on toxins, perhaps. She stiffened. Poisons are part of any medical study. Besides, Evelyn trusted me. Poirot turned to her notes, skimming without touching. His gaze sharpened. Your recent entries focus on compounds similar to the toxin used on Lady Evelyn. Miriam's eyes flashed defensiveness. And that makes me a murderer? No, Poirot said softly. But it makes you knowledgeable. And proximity to knowledge can be both a shield and a weapon. The tension thickened as they moved onward. The next door belonged to Selene Grey. Selene's room was dimly lit, delicate and melancholic. Lace curtains drawn tight, a small vase of wilted lilies by the bedside. On a vanity table lay a hairbrush, a silver locket, and a journal. She clutched her arms, shrinking beneath everyone's eyes. Poirot, please, I have nothing to hide. Poirot approached gently. Mademoiselle, your devotion to Lady Evelyn was clear, but devotion can become something more troubling. Were you jealous of her life, her wealth, her marriage? Selene's breath caught. Never. She was everything to me. She was kind, She helped me when I had nothing." Poirot glanced at the journal, noticing torn edges, pages removed. "And yet, someone removed entries from your journal. Recent ones." Selene trembled. I threw them away. They were personal." "Personal how?" Poirot asked softly. Her silence spoke louder than words. Poirot exhaled thoughtfully and stepped away, saving that mystery for later. The next room belonged to Lady Verona Blythe. The moment the door opened, the scent of expensive perfume filled the air, mixing with the metallic whisper of storm winds slipping through the balcony cracks. Verona lounged casually on her chaise, sipping something amber-coloured from a crystal glass. "Are we truly doing this?" she asked with a bored sigh. Poirot scanned her lavish belongings, silk gowns strewn across chairs, jewellery glimmering in half-open boxes, letters sealed with violet wax. He found what he sought quickly, an elegant envelope placed carelessly on her dresser, addressed to Lady Evelyn Hawthorne. Poirot lifted it carefully. "You wrote to the victim." Verona's expression shifted. "It was an apology letter. I never sent it. Eveline was planning to confront me tonight, so I intended to give it to her." Poirot opened the envelope. Inside was a blank sheet. "Curious," he murmured. "An apology with no words." Verona's cheeks flushed. "I didn't know what to write." "Or perhaps, madame," Poirot said, "you wrote something you could not allow others to read." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think I poisoned her over a petty argument?" Poirot bowed slightly. "I think, Lady Verona, that jealousy is never petty." Leaving Verona fuming, Poirot finally reached the last room, the master bedroom. Adrian hesitated at the door. "Poirot, must we? This was Eveline's sanctuary." Poirot placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "And it is here, my friend, that she felt the most threatened." Adrian's eyes widened with pain. He opened the door. The room was elegant, yet solemn, draped in soft whites and muted gold. Eveline's perfume still lingered faintly in the air. Poirot entered slowly, reverently, as though stepping into a chapel of memories. He inspected her writing desk, neat drawers, locked compartments. Poirot opened one. Inside lay a collection of letters, all unsigned, all threatening. Burroughs swore under his breath. These look like blackmail." Poirot read one aloud. "You meddle where you should not. Leave the accounts alone, or you will be silenced." Adrian sank onto the edge of the bed, shaking. "I didn't know. She didn't tell me any of this." Poirot looked at him with gentle sadness. "Grief blinds, monsieur, even to the fear in one's own home." He turned the final letter over and noticed something strange. A faint scent. Lavender. The same scent that clung to Lady Eveline's gown when she died. Poirot pocketed the letter. He straightened slowly, his voice calm but chilling. Someone in this manner visited Eveline the night she hid these letters. Someone carrying lavender perfume or lavender oil, and that same person handled the threats. He paused, turning his gaze toward the hallway where the suspects waited. "Mes amis, the killer is close." Thunder roared outside. A door slammed somewhere in the corridor. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And soon he or she will make a desperate mistake. Chapter 8. The Locked Parlor Secret. The morning sunlight reached the manor slowly. Its beams filtered through tall windows, veiled in dust and age. Yet despite the golden calm outside, the atmosphere within the estate was sharply tense, as though every corridor held its breath. Hercule Poirot walked with purpose towards the east parlour, the scene of Lady Grafton's poisoning. He had requested the room be sealed since the night of the crime, and now, with Inspector Hale beside him, he prepared to re-enter it. This time armed with new suspicions and sharper insights. The parlour door loomed ahead like a sentinel guarding forbidden truths. Hale unlocked it with an uneasy glance, and Poirot stepped in delicately, as though entering a cathedral of secrets. Inside, the air was still faintly tinged with the bitter scent of the fatal tea mixture. Poirot paused, bowing his head slightly, letting the silence settle around him. His sharp grey eyes drifted across every surface, the tea set, the mantel, the armchairs, as though each object might whisper a confession. The room was undisturbed since the night of the incident, its arrangement frozen in time. Poirot approached the tea tray carefully, lifting the porcelain pot with a gloved hand, noting the light film left inside. "Ah," he murmured, "the poisoner was neat, but not neat enough." Hale frowned, unable to see anything unusual. Poirot, however, tapped the lid. Inside, he could see faint discoloration in one corner. Someone had added the poison through a narrow spout using a dropper, a technique requiring confidence and calmness. Not the work of a panicked murderer, but someone who had planned meticulously. Poirot walked slowly around the room, tracing the space like a dancer marking steps. He stopped beside the window. "Inspector, do you observe?" he asked. Hale looked but saw only the heavy drapes and the lock. Poirot pointed to the sill. Dust disturbed in a narrow line, as though something had rested there recently. "Someone opened this window, however briefly." Hale blinked, but the staff said no one went near it. Poirot gave a thin smile. "People say many things, mon ami, especially when they fear the truth." The track suggested a small box or vial had been placed there, perhaps momentarily hidden. The room, locked after the incident, could only have been tampered with before the poisoning occurred, or by someone with a key. Poirot's gaze swept across the shelves near the fireplace, filled with old books and small ornaments. One figurine caught his attention, a ceramic dancer with one arm raised. It was slightly out of alignment with the rest. Poirot leaned in, adjusting it, revealing a small crevice behind it. He reached in and extracted a folded scrap of paper. "Voilà," he whispered. Hale watched with mounting astonishment as Poirot unfolded the note. Written in hurried strokes were 3 words. "She cannot know." No signature, no date. Hale's brow furrowed. Could that be from the victim? Poirot shook his head gently. "No, the handwriting is too bold. Lady Grafton wrote with elegant curves. This is from someone under stress." Poirot tucked the note into an envelope and continued scanning the shelf. His eyes were drawn to a faint scratch near the lower edge of the wood. On closer inspection, it revealed itself to be a fresh mark. Something metal had scraped there recently. A key, perhaps, or a locket. He crouched slightly, running his finger along the ridge, until he touched a small flake of metallic residue. Poirot examined it against the light. "Brass," he murmured. "Interesting." Brass keys were common, but the mark's size matched a smaller, more decorative piece. A key worn as jewellery, perhaps. Lady Eleanor wore such a necklace. So did Dr. Rowan, though his was more functional. And then there was Victor, whose chain had been noticeably shorter the previous evening, as though something had been removed. Poirot moved next toward the writing desk at the corner. The locked drawer he had requested be preserved held no surprises now, but the desktop contained a half-written letter in Lady Grafton's handwriting. The letter addressed someone with caution. "I fear I must take action soon. The situation grows dangerous, and I sense betrayal in the air." Poirot read silently, his expression tightening. This letter, had it been completed, might have exposed the blackmailer, or the poisoner. But it ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as though Lady Grafton had been interrupted. Poirot scanned the blotting paper beside it, holding it up to the light. A faint impression revealed the missing phrase, "especially from those I once trusted." This line chilled the room more deeply than the draught slipping through the walls. Poirot stirred, moving back toward the tea set, focusing now on a detail he had overlooked intentionally until this moment. The small spoon lying beside the second teacup. The victim had used the first cup, but this spoon bore residue too. Someone had stirred something into the cup intended for themselves, or intended for Lady Grafton, but later changed strategy. Poirot lifted the spoon, turning it slowly. A faint crystalline sheen clung to the edge, residue of the poison, but in a smaller concentration. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A test," he murmured. "The murderer tested the strength." Hale stiffened. "Tested? They risked poisoning themselves?" Poirot shook his head. "No, they wiped it after stirring. No ingestion, only observation." This meant the poisoner had been calm, methodical, and present long enough to experiment. This eliminated impulsive suspects. This narrowed the field sharply. Poirot's attention returned to the window, where a breeze grazed the curtains slightly. He approached again, turning the lock. The mechanism clicked with a stiffness that suggested recent force. Someone had tried to open it from the outside, but failed. Poirot visualized the scene. Someone passing a vial through the gap. Someone hiding outside until the moment was right. Someone who knew the servant's schedule. He looked toward the garden visible below. A footprint marked the soft earth. A narrow-heeled shoe, feminine, but not delicate. Firm steps. Lady Eleanor and Marianne both owned such footwear, but Marianne had been in the kitchen that evening. Eleanor, however, claimed to be in her room, a room with a clear view of the parlor window. Poirot inhaled deeply, piecing together the layers of deceit. He could feel the truth forming a delicate web, yet one more detail troubled him. He circled the room again, stopping abruptly at the entrance. The interior lock showed faint scratches, as if someone had tampered with it from inside. Poirot pressed his finger to the deepest groove, picturing the murderer locking the victim in with the poisoned tea, ensuring Lady Grafton had no escape. "Ah," he whispered with a sigh, "the killer is bold, but the room speaks louder than they understand." Poirot turned to Hale. "Inspector, the evidence grows clear. The poisoner is among them, but they have made one mistake, one fatal mistake, and I, Hercule Poirot, have seen it." Hale leaned in eagerly. "What mistake?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Patience, mon ami. We must hear them speak first. For the truth, it is ready to reveal itself." But before leaving the room, Poirot stopped suddenly. His gaze fixed on a barely visible thread caught on the chair where Lady Grafton had sat. He plucked it gently. A thin silver thread, unmistakably part of a garment seam. Poirot held it up to the light, lips curving into a knowing smile. "Now," he murmured, "the picture is complete." The chapter ends with Poirot stepping out of the parlor, pocketing the final clue, his mind sharpening for the confrontation to come. Chapter 9. Confrontation in the Drawing Room. The evening had settled over Hawthorne Manor with an uneasy stillness, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the tall arched windows. Inside, the drawing room seemed smaller than usual, the walls closing in with the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. Hercule Poirot had called all the principal suspects together, insisting that the truth could no longer linger in shadows. The guests assembled reluctantly, their faces pale, eyes flickering nervously from one person to the next. Every glance, every twitch, seemed to betray something, and Poirot observed with the precision of a hawk. He began slowly, stepping into the centre of the room. "Mes amis," he said, his voice calm yet charged with authority, "the night is nearly at an end, and yet the truth waits patiently, like a jewel beneath dust. We have discovered much. A poisoned cup, threatening letters, the parlour ledger, and a vial hidden in the cellar. And yet, someone here believed themselves cleverer than all of us." His eyes swept the room, lingering on each suspect, letting the silence stretch, tense and deliberate. Poirot first addressed Lord Adrian Hawthorne. "Monsieur, you grieved openly, but grief can be both genuine and performative. You were aware of your wife's concerns regarding her finances, yes?" Adrian swallowed hard. "Yes, but I did not harm her. I loved Evelyn more than my own life." Poirot inclined his head. "Love, mon ami, does not preclude fear. Fear can drive even the most loyal to desperate acts, and desperation leaves a trail." He turned next to Dr. Miriam Vale, who sat with her hands tightly clasped, a thin veneer of composure on her face. "Doctor, you had knowledge of toxins, and you had access to Lady Evelyn under the guise of care. You were present in the house when she prepared her tea that evening. Tell me, was your knowledge of compounds purely professional, or had it been applied with personal intent?" Miriam's lips pressed into a hard line. "Poirot! I saved lives. I would never harm her." Poirot's gaze remained unflinching. Mon Dieu! Yet one tests the waters of human nature when observing opportunity. Knowledge is power, but power can tempt. Poirot's attention shifted towards Celine Gray, whose body trembled ever so slightly. "You, mademoiselle, were devoted to Lady Evelyn, and yet your journal contained missing pages. Pages removed deliberately, perhaps to hide observations. What did you see, and what did you omit?" Celine's voice shook. I only tried to protect her. Nothing else." Poirot gave a subtle nod. "Protection or concealment, only time will show." Then he faced Lady Verona Blythe, who reclined with a haughty elegance that belied the nervous flicker in her eyes. "And you, Lady Verona. Jealousy is a powerful emotion, mes amis. You wrote to Lady Evelyn and did not send it. Why? Fear, malice, or a desire to manipulate her?" Verona's voice sharpened. "It was an apology, that is all." Poirot arched a brow. Apology unsent, and a smile carefully maintained. Yet one cannot mask fear so easily, not in the face of imminent discovery. Finally, Poirot's gaze fell on Damien Hartcliffe, whose face remained unreadable, yet betrayed a faint blush at Poirot's words. "Monsieur Hartcliffe, you were aware of disagreements over the charity's accounts. Lady Evelyn's ledger revealed irregularities you might have wished to suppress. And so, perhaps the poison seemed an expedient solution." Damien's mouth opened, then closed. I had disagreements, yes, but murder, never." Poirot's expression softened slightly. "Ah, but intention and action, they are separated by a slender line. One misstep, one lapse, and morality is cast aside." Poirot stepped forward, letting the room grow silent once more. "Mes amis, consider carefully. Lady Evelyn hid the parlour ledger because she feared exposure. She wrote letters, hid vials, left warnings. The poison was administered meticulously, with no panicked haste. It required planning, patience, and an intimate knowledge of the house." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like snow. The culprit, therefore, must be someone present in the house the evening she died. Someone with motive, means, and opportunity. And most importantly, someone who underestimated Hercule Poirot. He moved closer to the centre of the room and gestured toward the empty vial recovered from the cellar. This vial contained the exact quantity necessary to end life quietly. Whoever handled it left a trace, the parlor ledger, the notes, and this vial itself. The poisoner also attempted to mislead the household with the window incident, believing it would suggest an intruder. But no intruder entered. Only someone intimate with the routines of the manor could plan such deception. Poirot's eyes scanned the faces once more. One among you carried lavender the night of the murder. The scent clung to your clothing. You also interacted with the victim in her private spaces under the guise of conversation. And critically, you possessed knowledge of the contents of the parlor ledger before any other person. A faint gasp echoed through the room. Poirot's gaze softened, yet remained unyielding. Yes, mon ami, the answer lies in the combination of opportunity and fear has betrayed you. Silence blanketed the room. Finally, Poirot stepped closer to Miriam Vale, his voice gentle yet unwavering. Doctor, you underestimated your own vanity, your own confidence in your intellect. You believed your actions would go unnoticed. You administered the poison carefully, tested its effects, and then attempted to divert suspicion. But in doing so, you left a trail, one subtle yet unmistakable. Miriam's hands shook visibly. Poirot! No, I didn't mean. Poirot raised a finger delicately. Intent is irrelevant. Action speaks. You acted when you feared exposure of the ledger's contents. He turned to the assembled group. Mes amis, justice is not only about discovery, it is about understanding. Dr. Miriam Vale attempted to protect herself from embarrassment, but in doing so, she became the murderer of Lady Evelyn Hawthorne. Her knowledge, her access, her presence at the house during the fatal evening all pointed to her. Every clue we gathered, the hidden vial, the threatened letters, the careful positioning of the tea, has led to this moment. Hale stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Miriam's face paled, her eyes darting around the room for some escape that did not exist. Celine wept quietly. Lady Verona's mouth formed a perfect O of shock, and Damien and Adrian seemed unable to breathe. Poirot's expression, though calm, carried the weight of one who had stared into human frailty and emerged certain. Miriam sank into a chair, shaking. I only wanted to protect her, to prevent the scandal. Poirot shook his head gently. And in doing so, you sealed her fate. Fear of discovery is an old and powerful motivator, yet it cannot excuse murder. Justice, mes amis, remains absolute. As Hale moved forward to escort her from the room, Poirot looked around at the remaining guests. The guest air, once thick with tension, now seemed to breathe more freely. The storm outside had begun to abate, leaving the manor in a muted, trembling calm. Poirot's gaze lingered on the parlor ledger, now a symbol of truth finally revealed. And so, Poirot murmured softly, almost to himself, the mystery is resolved. The threads of deception have been unraveled, yet the lessons remain. Fear, secrecy, and ambition can lead the noblest of souls astray. And the human mind, though brilliant, is ever susceptible to folly. The chapter ended with Poirot standing alone for a moment in the drawing room, looking out the window at the receding storm. The house, silent at last, seemed almost to exhale, as though relief itself had settled upon its ancient walls. The mystery of Lady Evelyn Hawthorne had been solved, but Poirot's mind already began to consider the subtle reverberations, how lives would be forever changed by one deliberate act of desperation. Chapter 10. Resolution at Hawthorne Manor. The sun had finally risen, piercing through the lingering fog outside Hawthorne Manor, its weak light glinting off the dew-laden garden. Inside, however, a heavier light filled the drawing-room, the calm clarity of truth. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, the parlor ledger open on the table before him. a silent testament to the tangled web of lies, fears, and ambition that had culminated in Lady Evelyn's untimely death. The air, though quieter than the previous night, still carried tension, but now it was tempered with relief. The murderer had been revealed, the chaos contained, and justice prepared to follow its slow, deliberate course. Poirot's gaze swept across the assembled household, noting their expressions in detail. Lord Adrian, still pale from shock, seemed to carry the heavy weight of grief now paired with a dawning understanding. Celine Grey, though exhausted from the emotional ordeal, had regained a quiet dignity, her devotion to Lady Eveline now untainted by suspicion. Lady Verona Blythe, ever proud, had turned her sharp glare toward nothing in particular, though Poirot knew the unspoken relief behind it. Damien Hartcliffe, still struggling with his conscience, maintained an awkward composure, silently acknowledging how close suspicion had come to enveloping him. And finally, Dr. Miriam Vale, now restrained and silent, sat near the edge of the room, the weight of guilt etching lines across her face that no makeup could conceal. Poirot turned to Inspector Hale. "Mon ami, the case is resolved, yet there remains the matter of understanding, of why it unfolded as it did. The parlour ledger reveals not merely debts and accounts, but human character, desires, fears, and the subtle betrayals that go unnoticed until tragedy forces them into the light." Hale nodded, absorbing Poirot's measured words, understanding the detective's deeper point. The ledger was not merely a book, it was a mirror reflecting the human psyche, unflinchingly honest and merciless in its revelations. Poirot returned to the ledger itself, flipping through the pages with deliberate care. Each entry, carefully recorded, often in Lady Eveline's elegant shorthand, detailed donations, transactions, and correspondences that revealed a pattern of manipulation and hidden motives. The final entries, however, were of the utmost significance. Notes about irregularities in the accounts, cryptic warnings about trust, and the one line that had driven the murder. "I fear discovery by one I once called friend." It was clear now how fear had metamorphosed into action, how knowledge had become a weapon. Poirot's thin lips pressed together. Fear and ambition, when combined, could indeed be lethal. "Lady Evelyn was a woman of great foresight," Poirot continued softly, "and her intuition, though ultimately correct, was tragically underestimated by the one she trusted least in the end." He gestured toward Dr. Miriam Vale. She, driven by panic at potential exposure, calculated and administered the poison with cold precision, believing that secrecy would protect her. Yet even the most careful calculations cannot withstand the scrutiny of a methodical mind. Every detail she overlooked, every subtle mark she left behind, led to this revelation. Miriam's eyes, now moist, met his gaze briefly, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. Poirot then addressed the remaining guests, his tone shifting to a lighter, almost philosophical cadence. "Mes amis, consider the morale of this night. Wealth, ambition, knowledge, and fear are powerful, but they are not absolute. The parlour ledger, though a record of numbers, has revealed more than finances. It has unveiled the contours of character and the consequences of choices made in haste or in desperation. Lady Eveline's foresight was remarkable, yet it also serves as a reminder. Secrets, once discovered, can demand a terrible price." Selene stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Poirot, you've done more than uncover a murderer. You've shown us why she acted as she did, why the ledger mattered, and why we must now carry her memory with honesty." Poirot inclined his head gently. "Yes, mademoiselle. Justice is not merely the apprehension of a criminal. It is understanding the causes, the circumstances, and the consequences. Without comprehension, even truth remains a hollow statement. Lord Adrian, finally finding his voice, spoke next. And the manor, the family, will never be the same. Poirot's gaze softened. No, monsieur, never the same. But truth restores equilibrium, and equilibrium is the foundation upon which healing can begin. Mourning and reflection will follow, but deception, suspicion, and fear have now been dispelled. Hale moved toward Dr. Miriam Vale, guiding her gently. Poirot, meanwhile, collected the parlor ledger, placing it in his bag. "It will serve as evidence for the authorities," said, "and a record for history, not merely of a crime, but of the intricate subtleties of human behavior, where even loyalty and affection may be overshadowed by fear of exposure." Poirot's sharp eyes swept the room one final time. The murderer thought herself clever, but cleverness is not enough. Observation, attention, and the understanding of human nature, these are the true tools of justice. The manor, quiet now, seemed to exhale. The storm had cleared entirely, leaving a sky washed clean and pale. Birds stirred faintly outside, and the soft rustle of leaves replaced the prior cacophony of wind and rain. Poirot stepped to the window, allowing a shaft of sunlight to warm his face. "All is revealed," he murmured, "yet life will continue. Grief, sorrow, and reflection will follow, but order at last returns to Hawthorne Manor." Celine approached him, a faint smile lifting her features. "And Lady Evelyn? Her foresight, her caution, her wisdom, they are preserved now. Her legacy is not lost." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Oui, mademoiselle. Even in death, she has guided us to truth, to understanding, and in that guidance lies the power of justice." Finally, Poirot turned from the window, the manor now bathed in the soft glow of morning light, and addressed the assembled household. "Mes amis, let this be remembered. Evil acts may succeed temporarily, but careful observation, reason, and morality, these endure. Let Lady Evelyn's story, her wisdom, and her meticulousness remain a lesson to all who dwell within these walls, and to those who may encounter deceit elsewhere." The household, quiet yet composed, absorbed his words. Poirot, placing the parlor ledger securely in his bag, prepared to depart. The mystery had reached its conclusion, the murderer apprehended, and the truth revealed. Yet, even as he left Hawthorne Manor, his mind lingered on the subtleties, the small details, the hidden glances that had defined the course of this crime. For Poirot, each case was more than a puzzle. It was an exploration of the human heart. And with that, Hercule Poirot walked down the manor steps, the sunlight warming his path, leaving behind the echoes of a night filled with shadows, secrets, and ultimately the triumphant light of reason.